Alright, lesson 3, air brake systems. Alright, this is U.S. Army Light Wheel Vehicle Mechanic MOS 63B, skill level 3 course. Wheel Vehicle Braking System, subcourse number OD1008. Alright, lesson 3, air brake systems. Describe the principal construction operating straight air brake system. Given component conditions, given information components to operation straight air brake system. Reference TM9 8000. Learning event 1. Describe the components of the straight air brake system. The system component of the many parts of the straight air brake system. Cylinder compressor of the air system. Component of the air hydraulic brake system. Refer to the illustration below of the 6x6 truck air brake system. Over the components are discussed. Figure 16 shows your typical air brake system. Rubber hose to check release valve, compressor, brake chamber, rubber hose, number 1, number 2, cylinder compressor, governor gauge, brake valve, relay valves. The compressor air system consists of the air compressor for the governor, 2 reserve as about the same with the we stuff for the air brake air hydraulic brake system. There may be some minor differences with the air compressor for the governor, but they will not affect the maintenance practices on the components. Air inline connects the compressor air inline reservoir with the brake pipe of the brake pedal opposite the lever and the brake valve of the brake pedal is depressed that opens the valve in the brake valve of the measures a certain amount of the compressed air from the reservoir to go into the front of the rear axle. So he shows a quick release valve of the damper inlet port, exhaust port, your brake chamber port, and cover and diaphragm. The air in line with the brake valve of the front axle goes into the component known as the quick release valve. The brakes are applied with the quick release valve to direct for the compressed air for the right with the left of the brake chambers. The pedal is relief the air from the brake chamber to escape with the quick release valve with the release of the front brake for the air line with the brake valve with the escape of the exhaust valve with the brake valve. Figure 18 shows the relay valve of the brake valve port with the bypass valve of the brake chamber port, the gasket, the cap nut, the relay valve cross section, reservoir port, supply valve, exhaust valve port, guiding ring, diaphragm, diaphragm. Another airline connects to the brake valve with the relay valve with the rear of the vehicle. Normally, all this line contained with the stop light switch. The second airline supply with the reservoir air pressure for the relay valve of the brake pedal with the breath of the brake valve with the measures certain amount of the air to relay valve of the air. Opens the valve of the relay valve allows a small amount of the air from the reservoir to go each of the brake cylinders with the rear wheels. Brake pedal with the relief of the air pressure in the line between the brake valve and the relay valve with the release. And the close of the valve of the relay valve shutting off the air supply from the reservoir. At the same time, the quick release valve of the relay valve opens to allow for the air pressure for the brake chambers to the escape and then determine the release of the rear brake with the air in the line of the brake valve with escape of the brake valve with exhaust valve. The amount of the brake action applied with the truck wheel, depending on how far the brake pedal is depressed, the pedal is pressed the way down grade immediately with the air pressure applied with the brake chamber, the cover of the brake shoe with the lining with the press hard against the brake drum to provide with a greater braking action. Figure 19 show the brake chamber, show the diaphragm, air inlet, return spring, dirt seal washer, yoke, and push rod. The brake chambers, each of the wheel convert air pressure for the mechanical motion. The air enters the air inlet and moves the diaphragm, which moves the push rod. Figure 20 shows the slack adjuster attachments to the points of yoke of the brake chamber push rod. Shows the worm of friction loss, adjusting screw, grease, ports, rivet, and covering gear. The push rod of the brake chamber is connected with the slack adjuster. The slack adjuster shows with the two-purpose chamber, the back and forth motion, push rod, rotary motion to make minor adjustments to brake shoe linings. Alright, the slack adjuster spline at one end of the shaft that goes through the backing plate with the wheel brake with the other end of the shaft contained with the cam with the brake chamber push rod moves the end of the slack adjuster, causes the shaft to rotate as the cam of the brake end of the shaft rotate with the cover of the brake shoes with the linking move again for the drum. Minor adjusting of the brake is mainly rotating the worm shaft on the slack adjuster. When the brake assemblies on the move the same as those of the air hydraulic brake system, the main difference in the wheel cylinder is replaced with the operating cam. Or some wheeled vehicle requires special control of the braking. System is considered the 4x4 truck tractor, for example, known for the primary job of the pulling of the semi-trailer. The normal driven the conditions of the road is drive of the brake system will work well if the road is wet. With the slippery with the tractor trailer wheel jackknife at the front wheel of the tractor brake is too much. To prevent the wheels from having the front quick release valve contains a limited valve with a two-way valve that is also provided with the control limited valve. Two-way valve is mounted with the vehicle cab of the operator can reach easily with the valve that is driver slippery road position. Air inlet connection valve with the brake valve with another line goes two-way valve with a combined limiting quick release valve within the front of the axle. When the valve is dry road position, no air can pass through the two-way valve with the front axle. However, the valve is in slippery road position, air with the brake valve will pass through the two-way valve onto a quick release valve. When the air acts on the limiting device, the quick release valve that only allows the small amount of the air coming from the brake valve to go to the brake chamber. This will reduce the amount of the brake action on the front wheel, preventing the front brakes from locking, which could cause the tractor trailer to jackknife the trucks and tractors that pull heavy the trailer loads must also have the control will allow the operator to apply with the trailer brakes separately with the tractor brake. With this device is known as the independent truck trailer control valve, usually mounted on the truck steering column. Notice the pair we have above the valve is connected with the reservoir air pressure through manifold fitting of the auxiliary devices. Hand lever on the valve always operates and apply the air pressure for the double check valve and the rear of the vehicle. This valve allows the pressure to be applied with the trailer brakes through these trailer service line connections. And if the double check valve also has the line coming in from the brake valve, then this way the truck brakes can be operated with the truck brakes are applied, but it can be applied alone using a trailer control cab. Your semi-trailer air brake systems. Most large trailers are coupled with the air brake system, the surface of the airline with the emergency airline connection with the tractor for the head of the trailer brake with the system consisting of one or more with the reservoir with the relay emergency brake valve with the brake chamber and the lock adjuster for each wheel with the connecting with the airline. For the emergency line with the connecting with the tractor with the connecting with the valve that is open with the flow for the track reservoir to the trailer relay valve with the reservoir with the raise of the air pressure for the trailer and the same pressure as if the truck holds on with the quick release valve with the relay emergency valve with the compressed air with the truck trailer reservoir is now available to make the trailer brakes work. The brake to the truck brake pedal with the compressed with the trailer brake control the level of the compressed air move through the service line with between the tractor and trailer at the top of the relay emergency valve with the trailer. The compressed air relay will cover the release valve with the opening of the valve with the relay and emergency valve, allowing the air to travel the rear of the reservoir to go each wheel brake chamber on the trailer with the supply with the brakes. When pressure of the surface line is released, the air supply from the trailer reservoir over the brake chamber is shut off. At the same time, the quick release valve of the emergency relay valve is open so that the air brake chambers can escape and relieve the trailer brake. The relay emergency valve is designed to lock the trailer brakes in the case of trailer ever breaks away from the tractor. If then for some reason the emergency airline supply becomes disconnected from the tractor, there will be no air pressure applied when the air enters. Relay emergency valve will allow the pressure for the quick release valve will close, allowing the air pressure from the reservoir to go to the brake chamber. This will lock all the brakes on the trailer. The brake will remain locked as long as the air pressure from the trailer reservoir remains high enough. However, as soon as the supply of the air is hooked to the emergency line again, the pressure will open the quick release valve and close off the air supply of the chamber. The brakes will release. The brakes can also be released, draining the air from the reservoir. Alright, learning event 2, discover the Operation Straight Air Brake System. Operation Straight Air Brake System. So far, we discovered the components that contain the air brake system that do and what they do. Now for the components function and important with the mechanical diagram for the troubleshoot without making errors. Mentioned before, the component for the compressed air system is about the same as those of the 2.5-5-ton truck for the operation of the air compressor for the governor's reservoir. High pressure relief valve with the drain cock with the air brake system the same as was discussed earlier in system air hydraulic system again with the system maximum pressure about 105 psi. The brake valve with the brake applicator for the device for the operator with the control pressure for the brakes is mounted under the floor of the cab controlled by the brake pedal movement that is made so that the driver can vary with the air pressure emitted to the brake chamber as well with the later the more air pressure there is in the brake chamber the more of the brake shoe will be forced again with the brake chamber the shovel the type of the brake valves, but they will all do the same job. The main difference between the type is that they operated foot pedal only while others operated with the foot pedal have the ion operated limited control. Standard brake valves are fitted with the levers for the connected operated foot pedal. As the lever is moved toward the fully upright position, the mechanical force will apply with the top of the diaphragm of the brake valve. This is done with the action of the plunger and the press string and the regulating spring. Assemble the diaphragm, move the downward. The force is applied with the middle of the rocker arm of the inlet and exhaust valve. Because the exhaust valve spring is weaker than the inlet valve, the spring and the exhaust valve is forced down to the seat before the inlet valve is forced down to open. Alright, when inlet valve opens, the air pressure flow of the reservoir through the valve of the brake chamber, apply with the brake for the air pressure for the being delivered to the brake chamber from the opening below the diaphragm overcome with the mechanical force being applied with the top of the diaphragm lift the inlet permits of the inlet valve of the close, the preventing any further rises of the air pressure brake chambers while exhaust valve remains closed to prevent the escaping the air pressure of the driver. Push of the foot pedal farther down with the mechanical the force applied with the top of the diaphragm, which happens more pressure for the delivered end to the brake chamber to apply with the brake. The driver lets the pedal move toward the release position. The force at the top of the diaphragm reduced at the pressure below the diaphragm overcome with the mechanical force at the top of the diaphragm lift slightly. When it happens, the inlet valve remains closed with the exhaust valve open. The exhaust valve air pressure from the brake chamber until the air pressure below the diaphragm again balance with the mechanical force over the top of it. If the driver lets the foot pedal return to fully released position, the exhaust valve remains open. They apply with the pressure of the brake chamber. The exhaust with the brakes are fully released. If the driver pushes the pedal down with a fully applied position, pressure regulating the spring compressed until the spring guide with a strike with the spring slat. This hold with the rocker arm down. The inlet of the valve is held open with the full reservoir pressure is allowed to pull. Pass through the brake valve of the brake chamber. The trail brake control valve is used to apply with the release of the trailer brakes, applying with the brakes of the towing vehicle with the type of the vehicle visually mounted with the steering column mounted. The instrument panel of the driver may pull a handle in any one of the several positions between the raised and fully applied positions. Alright, as handled with the brake valve, the move toward the applied position, force applied with the top of the pressure for the regulating spring. What happens with the spring piston moves downward with the exhaust valve set, and as you engage with the exhaust valve, with the close of the passage with the exhaust port, with the exhaust inlet, and with the valve with the being part with the same assembly. Both of the valves move together with the exhaust valve with the close of the position assembly continue with the move downward. The inlet valve with the force off with the seat of the inlet. This lets the air pressure of the reservoir pass through the inlet valve of the out of the brake chamber, the port with the connection leading to the surface line with the brakes for the trailer. As soon as the air pressure below piston assembly will overcome with the mechanical force of top of the piston assembly lift and the intake valve closes with the closing the inlet valve stops the airflow from the reservoir exhaust valve remains closed with the preventing the loss of the air from the exhaust port. If the brake valve handle is moved forward for the farther towards the fully applied position, add additional mechanical force at the top of the piston assembly increase the delivered air pressure. If the brake valve handle is moved toward the release position, the mechanical force of the top of the piston assembly with the degree of the air pressure below the piston assembly lifts it slightly, opening the exhaust valve, permitting the air pressure of the exhaust to service the line. The air pressure under the piston for the mechanical force top of the piston is again equal. The exhaust valve will close. The brake valve handling is moved to relief the position. The intake valve is closed. The exhaust valve is open. All pressure is lost of the brake cylinder and the brakes are released. Another device of the air brake system, quick release valve for the purpose of the valve with the aim of the suggested speed up of the release of the applied air brakes. Air pressure for the brake valve into the brake valve port with the valve of the diaphragm moves down, close to the exhaust port, where the air pressure goes around the outer edge of the diaphragm flow over the outside of the connection brake chamber ports, and the brake chamber is applied with the brake shoes. Alright, assume that the pressure of the brake chamber, the connecting line with the equal with the brake valve above the diaphragm with the force of the spring below the diaphragm, out over the edge of the diaphragm, back up against the bive. At the same time, with the center of the diaphragm, keep the exhaust port closed. This is holding position. If the brake valve pressure of the top of the diaphragm is reduced with the brake chamber, the pressure relief of the diaphragm, the open with the exhaust port with the less of the brake, less of the brake chamber, the pressure of the chamber through the exhaust port with the brake valve with the pressure of the top of the diaphragm is only partially with the diaphragm goes down the holding position, soon with the pressure above below is equal. As stated earlier, with the relay valve, the with the rear wheels of the trucks to speed with the application relief of the rear brakes. When the valve is released position with the reservoir pressure for the cavity below with the supply valve, which is closed with the diaphragm is normal position, resting with the diaphragm guide. When the brake valve is applied with the center of the air through the brake valve with the port with the cavity above the diaphragm with the pressure push of the diaphragm down with the diaphragm moves down with the outer edge seal with the exhaust port center with the diaphragm forces diaphragm guide and supply valve down. This opens the supply valve to allow the air pressure from the reservoir to flow through the supply valve with the cavity below with the diaphragm with the cavity is connected with the brake chamber. The port with the brake chamber is with the mechanism in the position, air pressure flowing directly with the reservoir through the relay valve into the brake chamber, applying the brakes. Assume that the air pressure below the diaphragm equals the air pressure of the diaphragm force of the supply valve with the spring lift at the center of the diaphragm closed with the supplied air valve with the lines are air pressure being delivered to the brake chambers by the relay valve. The same pressure being delivered by the brake valve with the relay valve with the position supply valve with the closed and force air pressure for the top of the diaphragm. Keep the outer edge of the diaphragm down, sealing the exhaust port and increase brake valve with the pressure. Repeat the action as in the applying position until the two pressures are equal again. If the brake valve valve the brake chamber. The exhaust is with the lower balance pressure is removed. The air pressure delivered by the brake valve drops to zero. The relay valve releases all of the pressure of the hold of the brake chamber. The release of the brakes valve will return to the release position. A relay emergency valve used with the air brake system. The trailer of the valve that acts as the relay during the operation of the brakes. They also automatically apply with the trailer brakes when the airline to the towing vehicle to disconnect if they were broken. The operation of the relay portion of the valve is made with much of the same with the truck relay valve as during the normal operation. However, what happens if the airline with the disconnect with the trailer breaks away from the towing vehicle is quite different. Relay emergency valve is made open, made to go with the emergency position. Apply with the trailer brakes. There is a lot quick drop of the pressure of the cavity below. Emergency diaphragm for if the emergency line broken. Air pressure for the cavity below with the emergency diaphragm will flow out with the broken emergency line. Air pressure above the emergency diaphragm will push the diaphragm down with the upper emergency valve down, closing it, and air pressure down above the check valve will hold it down closed. Air pressure for the trailer reservoir can only flow across the top of the depressed emergency diaphragm into the cavity leading with the brake chambers applying the brakes. As the air escape with the below of the air emergency diaphragm, pressure for the pressure regulating diaphragm drops instantly. Spring below with the pressure regulating diaphragm pushes it up and the closing of the pressure regulating valve. The pressure in the trailer reservoir prevented with escaping through the broken line. Close the upper emergency valve. The release of the trailer brakes in the air reservoir will have to be drained air over the emergency line reconnected to the towing vehicle. Or when the trailer emergency line with the connect with the emergency line with the towing vehicle, the airflow with the tractor reservoir through the emergency line and into the relay emergency valve, the airflow with the line check for the valve that flows over the top of the emergency diaphragm supply line chart with the trailer reservoir, and at the same time, air has also been flowing below the emergency diaphragm into the cavity with below the pressure regulating diaphragm after the continuous flow in the manner with until the air pressure for the cavity with the pressure of the regulating diaphragm reaches 70 psi. Brake chambers are mounted with each of the wheel with the purpose of this to convert energy with the compressor for the mechanical force motion necessary for the operation of the brakes. One top of the brake chamber consists manually with a housing diaphragm and a push rod and spring air compressor engine for the brake chamber for the behind with the diaphragm force of the adjuster level which rotates the shaft and a can to apply with the brake. The higher the air pressure emitted with the brake with the chamber, the greater the force of the push rod with the air pressure relief of the brake chamber. The spring return with the push rod of the diaphragm relief position. Step of the brake chamber, the discussable above some of the vehicles. You with the roto chamber, the pressure into the roto chamber to behind with the diaphragm, move with the diaphragm forward, the move the diaphragm moves along inside of the wall cylinder body with the rolling motion. This motion for the diaphragm force of the push rod forward, higher the air pressure emitted with the roto chamber, the greater the force of the push rod. If all of the air pressure is released from the roto chamber, the spring return for the diaphragm push rod with the release position. There is only another version of the brake chamber, the air into the compressor air opening, and that will go behind the piston. Piston will move the drive with the push rod compressing the piston with the air pressure for the back of the piston is relief of the piston, spring return with the piston, push rod to release position. The slack adjuster U with the air brake system convert back to the fourth motion and with the rotary motion, provide quick and easy way to adjust the brakes and compensate with the brake lining. A slack with the adjuster mainly worn greater contained in the body having the lever arm, the gear splinted spline with the fit of the brake camshaft with the normal braking end tire, and the slack adjuster moves on one solid unit. It acts as a simple lever to transmit brake chamber forces to the brake shaft until the brakes are applied with adjustment are made by turning the worm shaft. This turns the worm gear in the brake camshaft, moves the brake shoes either closer or farther from the brake drum. So far, we have only discussed the main components of the air brake system. Included in the system are smaller items and check with valves and shut-off valves, safety valves, hose lines, and fittings. The organizational mechanic will be required to maintain all these. Maintenance will have to be done on these items with the organization mechanism. Mechanic is much like the air hydraulic system. The maintenance will again inspection, testing, adjusting, repairing, replacing worn defective parts. Repair will consistently manually tighten and replacing part. Keep in mind air leaks are your biggest enemy. Be sure to tighten all connections properly so you will not lose air. Will not have loss of air pressure. Our learning event 3, describe inspection procedure for the tray air brake system, inspection road test. The inspection road test of the wheel vehicle will determine the condition of the brake system and valve of the stream regardless of whether the brakes are air or air hydraulic. Therefore, except for the view of the special air brake component of the inspection test is made similar to the 2.5 and 5 ton vehicle. The inspection consists of the checking the air hose fitting of the chamber, the cylinder linkage with the loss and damage, looseness or damage. Check for the water air reservoir with the start of the engine. Observe the air pressure build up. Check for the leak in line fittings. Phone stop of the engine, sealing with the air pressure for the gear drop of noticeable with a period of one time, and it does more than testing with the leaks required. And visual inspection indicate the brake system seems to be in a good condition. Road test of the vehicle to see just how well the brakes operate during the road test. Check for the side pull with the noise and clatter. Make several stops to be sure of the check. Immediately after the road test, check with the temperature for the brake drum. If they're too hot, the brakes are dragging. If one is too cold, then the wheel brake is not operating. If any deficiencies are not during the inspection road test, they must be corrected. Discuss with the app. Some of the test replacement procedures with air brake components that are different from the one's air hydraulic system table. One provides troubleshooting guide for the service of the brake system. Table 1 shows the trouble of servicing brake system, insufficient brakes too slow. And then it shows the troubleshooting system. I just wonder if that's just going to be the rest of the paper. And that was your U.S. Army Light Vehicle Mechanical MOS 60 through B, Skill Level 3 of the McWheel Vehicle Braking System, Subcourse number 0D1 OD1008.